Hi, we're Poppy and Geoff Spencer, your relational experts. Welcome to this new series this month, Your Healthy Heart. The title of this week's series is called A Healthy Heart, What's Love Got to Do with It? And we say in one word, everything.
And Tina Turner sang it passionately. What's love got to do with it? And what's love but a secondhand emotion? Well, we're here as your relational experts to say that love is not a secondhand emotion. Who needs a heart when it can be broken? Well, we all do. And not only do we need your heart, but how it becomes broken, we can share with you ways to mend it. Last month in our series titled Your Relationship Makeover, we discussed emotional checkups, our trademarked communicational tool, the emotional clock, and how we want to avoid the emotional Bermuda Triangle in our relationships. We also shared inspirational tips from our master coach, the one and only Jack Canfield, best-selling author of more than 150 Chicken Soup for the Soul books. In our day spent with Jack a few weeks ago, we brushed up on our visualization practices and shared with you as well as how to sack out those limiting beliefs. And last week, we talked about how to be encouraged, how to stay in your heart at all times.
Oh boy, did we ever have inspiration this past week. A few days ago, we attended an amazing event here in Sarasota, Florida with our friends who were the keynote speakers. This is at Sarasota Memorial Hospital. The chief of cardiovascular surgery, Dr. Geoff Sell, and renowned cardiologist, Dr. Chippy Nalluri. You know, Sarasota Memorial Hospital is considered to be in the top 50 best hospitals in the country. And we say this because the message we got at the event was not about how great the hospital is, even though it is, but more, much more. About what we can do as a country, as a community, to shift the way we think about heart disease, the number one killer of women in the USA, and the numbers were absolutely startling.
And here's what we learned, folks, and they're very startling statistics. 1 in 31 women die each year from breast cancer. I think we've all heard a lot about that. But what you don't know is that 1 in 3 women die each year from heart disease. That's close to 40,000 women each year will die from breast cancer, and almost 400,000. It's 398,000 and 86 will die from heart disease. About 10 times as much. And not to be the bearer of bad news here, but these are frightening facts. What's most upsetting is that we have all jumped in to support breast cancer, the programs, thanks to the great Susan G. Komen Foundation. And remember, we had that Nancy Goodman, the pioneer who took the lid off breast cancer and was determined to address it for women. Well, people need this just as much red things as we need pink things, if not more, maybe 10 times more. And Dr. Chippy Nalluri beseeched all 500 people in the room to make a paradigm shift. She shared with the group that there are programs that actually work to reverse heart disease. And by the way, none of the causes of heart disease are genetic. They're all preventable. Let me repeat that. They're all preventable.
Yeah, that was really, you could have heard a pin drop in the room when those facts were given. And, you know, following the 4 steps of the Dr. Dean Ornish lifestyle program, something that is pioneered here in Sarasota at our hospital, the program that I happen to follow, by the way, and you would focus on this. If you follow this, and I know you know this, nutrition, exercise, meditation, and love. And yes, love. And many people believe that in a mere few hours after her daughter Carrie Fisher's death, that Debbie Reynolds died of a broken heart. Well, in science terms, that's called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, or in lay terms, broken heart syndrome. That was pretty scary because we've heard that before, but that's not all. It's almost always exclusive in women. Whoa. You know, the term came from Japan in 1990. Takotsubo cardiomyopathy's common culprit is, guess what? What do you think it is? It's stress, specifically emotional stress. And what we know and what we reheard was that this is all preventable. We have control over our emotional stress. We probably all know someone you might know someone who might have died from emotional stress, a broken heart. I mean, we do. And what we suggest as relational experts is that the best way to infuse your marriage with love or your most meaningful relationship or relationships is to have a heart-healthy communication. And we'll share some examples of how to do just that.
We discussed earlier in last month's podcast how if the relationship is emotionally stressed, that the first step in treatment is open and honest communication, always the solution. Fear and avoidance of important subjects in a relationship is the emotional equivalent of heart or artery blockages in the physical body. As left untreated, our spirits and souls will wither. So talking or communicating is vital to maintain a clear pathway to the heart.
Secondly, if there's a problem in the relationship and maybe one partner is not willing to have an open-hearted discussion, we usually suggest always, to return to focus on the self. Last week, we recently had a few sessions with a client with whom we've worked, and we repeated that one. She shared with us that the partner was not able to discuss a conflict they had, and they had not agreed when they would revisit the problem or resolve it. Our client shared with us the high degree of stress that was felt. And our four-part treatment plan, we say, was non-invasive. Mm-hmm. The client agreed to, 1, she agreed to journal with gratitude. 2, we capitalized on the Myers-Briggs preference of extroversion, which is something that her profile indicated that she had a clear preference for extroversion. So we suggested that she go out and engage with other people. 3, we suggested she physically move so that the emotional overwhelming thoughts don't take over. And 4, and this sounds kind of silly, but honestly, in practice, it really works. And that's to mirror affirmations to yourself. As a psych professor, I once taught my students that we can shift our mindset in less than 17 seconds. You can even see a physiological shift in the body when you look at yourself in the mirror and say affirmations out loud. It's like, I am wonderful, I am smart, I am healthy, I am beautiful, you get the gist of it. And even though it feels awkward to say that to yourself in the mirror, it is something that can actually change the stress hormone in your body. It can lower your cortisol. This is kind of like emotional coronary bypass with 0 post-op recovery. When the client did these exercises, we received this email in response. Thank you, ! I've journaled and done the affirmations. Thank you. You don't know how much this helped me. No matter what happens, I'm in a good, solid place.
I think that's a very big point. No matter what happens, I'm in a solid place, because that's always where people often back away from things, because they're afraid something bad might happen. Well, if you're in a good place, you'll stay there. That's known as relief on our emotional clock, the 7 o'clock setting. And once people reach this point, they have momentum to keep moving on the encouraged or left side of the clock, where you're in your heart encouraged. We were asked by another client, what if the relationship is clearly broken? What do I do? Well, we first help this client reframe the present situation, the now. Whatever happens in the broken relationship can serve you in multiple ways. You can realize that you've grown, that you've learned that there is an opportunity there to move on and still love yourself. An opportunity for you to find someone who can love and give you what you truly need. And by the way, we recently spoke with a client who lamented that he didn't want the relationship to end, even though it wasn't very good, because he'd been with the woman for 7 years. He'd already invested so much of his time, he held tightly onto his investment of 7 years, saying, I don't want the relationship to be over because I will have wasted 7 years. And he initially repeated this mantra.
And that was something that's really hard because it seems counterintuitive for people. But we did help him to reframe those 7 years and explain that those were growing years, that we helped him to identify and discover what he wants and what he doesn't want in a future relationship. He actually wrote down his desired qualities in his ideal relationship. And it took him some time because he kept slipping back to his default setting of the time investment, and he began to feel guilty about what he called a bad investment.
And we see this all the time happen with a lot of people. The more time they put into it, the less willing they are to consider getting out because they just don't want to have to start over again.
Right. And so that reluctance is always a big barrier. But eventually, after about 3 sessions, it usually takes a minimum of 21 days to get rid of a long-held limiting belief, by the way. But after about 3 sessions, he began to reaffirm his choices and decisions. And this reframing is so important, and because it helps us to stay positive and to examine the desired and the undesired parts of relationships and hold them all equally as valuable is really important. And let me just add to that. It's like, it seems counterintuitive to say, well, why do I want to look at and examine the undesirable parts of the relationship? Because therein is the core, or the core of how you grow.
Poppy and I talk about this all the time, especially when we first got back together again after being apart for 32 years, if you haven't heard our story before. We've never regretted nor resented the time we were with others when we were married to other people. Because we both grew during those years. We had children. We experienced life. We experienced death and challenges during those years. And while I often feel badly that we lost a lot of those wonderful years we could have shared together and wish we'd had more, I appreciate life with Poppy so much more because of that contrast. I'm able to really, really understand and appreciate how great we have it, and I don't take anything for granted.
And that's a really good thing. That daily appreciation is something that we do every day in our communication. And we
have little gratitude sheets we fill out at the end of the day. That's what I'm grateful for.
We each have a gratitude box for the whole year, a daily one. Sometimes people ask me, and I'll be the first one to say that I have never regretted my marriages because of my children. I'm so grateful to those relationships because of the gifts I've received. I honor and respect my children's fathers. In fact, in our last podcast, we spoke about how our daughter and Geoff and I stayed with my ex-husband and his lovely wife when we went to Atlanta to watch the NFC Championship game between the Packers and the Falcons. It wasn't a very good game, by the way, but it was a really enjoyable...
Not for a Packer fans. The Falcons probably thought it was great.
But it was so wonderful because they were gracious and welcoming. And the 4 of us, my ex and his wife and Geoff and I, all share a common respect for one another. We have a common goal to do the best for our shared children, and that's paramount to what we're talking about. So our values are aligned. In divorce, we're exactly on the same page, which is, I know, probably uncommon, but we consider it a blessing. That's one of our gratitudes.
And it's one of those things that we like to always help people with, too, is to try to always keep focusing on children when they're angry, especially when a divorce is fairly fresh and there can be a lot of things they're upset about. Always keep focusing back on the children. We had another client who shared with us her story of when she was engaged and in a relationship for 6 years. She'd realized she was doing all of the heavy lifting and the giving of herself and all of her time, her energy, and resources. She was supportive to a fault. She finally had the courage, and it always comes down to that, courage, to gather up all the red flags. One huge big red flag was infidelity, by the way. And she really looked at the relationship in an honest way. She immediately discovered that she was 110% invested, and he was only about 30% invested. And even though she didn't know what lay ahead, she broke off that engagement. She didn't adhere to the notion that someone is better than being alone. That's a big thing we often talk about. And we can't stress that enough, folks. Please choose the leap of faith over staying in an unfulfilling or bad relationship with someone else. You can always choose yourself to focus on and take the time to honor and care for yourself. Some might think, well, isn't this being selfish? Isn't that not being selfish in the negative sense? And we mean this in a positive, healthy way, ways that honor your own gifts and talents to reclaim the very best parts of yourself.
Yes, and when this client left her engagement behind her, yes, she was nervous. She was a little bit apprehensive because she had no future plans. Those had all been erased. But she said, I took a leap of faith and it paid off. A year later, an old boyfriend found me and traveled to another state and came up to my door. I was shocked to see him. My mother had given him my address, but I
guess mom liked him, huh?
I guess so. She says, but I immediately sent him away as he confessed to her that he was still married. So she had no contact with him after that for a year. And a year later, he found her on social media, said he was single, and could they get together? And that day that he reached out to her on Facebook, her mother had passed away. And she took it as a sign that her mother had left her this one last message. I mean, it gives me goosebumps. Mm-hmm. And today she and the old love are together. The leap of faith had worked. I love that story. It sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, it kind of does have a familiar ring to it. Talking about us, folks, if you hadn't guessed that. And we have another client, a couple who came to us for a few sessions who were not on a unified front. Their dynamic was not good, and as parents, it manifested into kind of a good cop, bad cop scenario. The woman was the bad cop, and the two young children, wise beyond their years, knew just how to play them. Good cop dad was just plain nice, non-confrontational, but also not supportive of his spouse, not a good recipe for healthy parenting. They struggled with their communication together as well as how to have a unified front to the children. In brainstorming with our couple, we came up with action steps for them to take home for some homework.
Yeah, so we determined that a communication template was important for the well-being of the spouses as well as the kids, for the whole family. We told the parents to create a list of each other's talents, gifts, qualities, the things that they really, truly appreciate and admire about one another.
That can sometimes be a struggle for folks when there's some challenging dynamics to actually sit down and think of all the positive aspects.
Right. And so before they do that, though, because especially if you're going into this with some resentment or anger or frustration, we say you have to get in the right mindset, a healthy mindset. So a brief meditation, even if it's 5-10 minutes beforehand with some visualization and focused breathing, then you can create that list of the 10 best qualities they appreciated and respected in one another. And this list set up a positive arena for their conversation to continue about parenting. They eventually compared and contrasted the list. They identified how they complemented each other, and they looked for weaknesses and strengths, both in their communication styles and in their parenting approach. And immediately they were able to identify and address the holes in their parenting approach.
You know, the good cop in this scenario was a big-time conflict avoider, and this can always be a big challenge when you want to avoid conflicts. A really nice guy, and there's, by the way, nothing wrong with being a really nice guy, but often, as we know, that parenting requires us to take a stand. That stand must be singular, standing as one with your spouse. In this scenario, the hardworking guy was not around too much for the day-to-day challenges, but he still wanted to have a nice relationship with his kids, and so they would end up watching sporting events before attending to homework. And mom was always the heavy and had to set up an unhealthy dynamic where she became angry and resentful because she was the one saying, no, homework first, football game second. And she was at 5 o'clock on our emotional clock, and everyone was lost, especially the kids. They got mixed messages and were repeatedly shown a divided front, a real source for problems.
Right. And this is so common. We see this because everybody is so busy with their schedules, and each child might have a different extracurricular activity after school, different homework needs and challenges. So it's really hard to set up this time. Mm-hmm. Maybe on a Sunday, you could have a family meeting and say, okay, we're going to take some time out and address these things so that when they do come up, we have a plan in place. So,
before the football game.
So we're not living by the seat of our pants, So when we shared with the man that his being a nice guy was actually hurting his relationship, not only with his wife, but also with his kids, he seemed surprised. He understood how it might hurt his wife or how she might get the message that he was being disrespectful. But his kids, he didn't get that. We explained that he was role modeling disrespect for his wife and to his children in undermining her parenting. And we also showed that his kids, when things got messy or challenging, that they should also avoid conflict as he did. You can't escape that. So it wasn't a good message to teach them. And you know what? and we look at it today and we often talk about it, and that's another podcast for another day. But so many of our young people today have a hard time with resolving conflict and coping. They have poor coping mechanisms, but that's another day.
It is, but it's mostly because we haven't taught them all the right things to do so. But
the responsibility is on us as parents to teach those healthy coping skills.
Of course. The solution we came up with these folks to approach their conversation using our trademark communication tool, the emotional clock, to first talk to one another before they talk to the kids. And we wanted them to also have kind of a strategy in place that if a problem did arise in front of the children, that the parents, if they couldn't deal with it right then, they needed to leave the room or signal to one another in some way that they're on the same page and they are okay as how to resolve this conflict. And this can be a very simple thing. A signal can be a nod or prearranged word or something, whatever. But something's in place for how to deal with a sudden problem. Sometimes the challenge is not readily solved. The parents need to recess like a jury and deliberate and take the time to reach a unanimous vote.
Yes, and can't stress that unanimous, that united, one, the single unit, that voice, the parenting voice is a singular thing. And as a mom of 4 kids and as a parenting expert for more than 25 years, this time away in, quote, deliberation, unquote, can be fabulous for the kids. Oh my gosh, the times we spent behind closed doors talking and reaching a verdict. The kids' fertile imaginations went nuts, wondering what horrific sentencing might occur. Their minds conjured up all sorts of evils. I'll never be allowed to go on vacation ever again. I'll be grounded forever. I'll lose my driving privileges, or have ongoing regular family meetings, which I know firsthand produced a fair share of extensive eye rolling.
Oh, the kids always loved it when we call a family meeting. Yeah. Oh, joy.
Yeah, they hated that. But it really worked. And you'd be surprised if you asked your kids what consequence they should have for any kind of transgression that they had. I guarantee you they'll come up with something far worse than you would have considered.
So what does all this have to do with heart health? The American Heart Association gives us these stats. When stress is constant, your body remains in a high gear, off and on for days or weeks at a time. Studies using psychosocial therapies involving both psychological and social aspects are promising in the prevention of second heart attacks. There's a definite correlation between stress and heart issues. When parents are stressed, families are stressed.
See, so we really have to get to the heart of it here, and that's what we're trying to do. And remember that old adage, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. Well, it's been suggested that stress triggers inflammation, a known instigator of heart disease, but that hasn't been proven. And Dr. Deepak Bhatt from the Harvard Medical School says, stress does cause some people to act in ways that increase their risk for heart disease. So we know that scientists, researchers have shown that this happens.
We even discovered in doing some of our research, there's even an American Institute of Stress.
We didn't know that.
Didn't know that. And their motto is, we make a living by what we get, but a life by what we give. Pretty cool. So the American Institute of Stress zero in on the fight or flight responses that we have. And that's something we're very familiar with. That's 6 o'clock on our emotional clock. It's at this setting that we need to make a decision. And things here are at sort of a tipping point, and we will either fall back to the discouraged side of the emotional clock, to the negative settings, or move forward to 7 o'clock in relief in the encouraged or in your heart settings.
Yes. And the American Institute of Stress also says this, and I'm going to read from their site. The appreciation that different emotions could have powerful influences on the heart and the recognition of some understood mind-heart connection is hardly new. Aristotle and Virgil actually taught that the heart rather than the brain was the seat of the mind and soul. And similar beliefs can be found in ancient Hindu scriptures and other Eastern philosophies. So some 2,000 years ago, the Roman physician Celsus unwittingly acknowledged that the mind-heart relationship noting that fear and anger and any other state of the mind may often be apt to excite the pulse.
It's funny because Poppy wears one of these fancy new watches, the Garmin watch that shows her heart rates and her, and gives other information. But whenever we watch any kind of exciting, or we watched kind of a scary movie last night.
We watched Taken last night. Oh my God, I've seen it twice, but I checked my heart rate. It spiked. It
spikes at those very scary moments, and Poppy always looks down at her watch. I wonder what my heart's at right now, and at this real terrifying part. But the Institute of Stress offers this. Our earliest uses of the word heart clearly indicate its conceptualization as the seat of our innermost feelings, temperament, or character. Broken-hearted, heartache, take it to heart, eat your heart out, heart of gold, heart of stone are just a few of the words and phrases we use that vividly symbolize such beliefs. And Poppy and I say that when we have these intimate and challenging discussions, that we look into our heart of hearts to bring our authentic selves to the table. And you might have had this asked of you when someone's asking what you're truly thinking, what do you really feel, what's in your heart of hearts. That's really gets us about as deep as you can get.
I love that. All of our hearts need to be maintained through a daily practice of open, authentic, and clear communication. And we're here to help you as you approach that sticky subject or tackle a deep-seated fear, no matter what relationship needs attention, whether it's personal or professional. Sometimes somebody might have an issue with a coworker or a boss, a sibling, a family member that's been estranged. We can help with that. Using our emotional clock will help you identify where you are in your emotions, and we can help you address these thoughts and feelings, especially if you hit that 6 o'clock hour of fight or flight. You know what? Your heart health depends on you making healthy choices for your body and your spirit. And our most important relationships have this one commonality: love. So, as we said in the beginning, and Tina Turner sang it so beautifully, love has everything to do with our communication and our connection.
And you can reach us at relationalexperts.com. And please leave your story, your questions, or your comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if you have a topic you want covered, reach out to us at our website, relationalexperts.com. We can address it here on the podcast for you. Thanks for listening in. This is Poppy and Geoff Spencer, your relational experts, talking about heart-healthy communication.
And next week, we look forward to connecting with you when we have our 6th podcast with the title Heart Healthy Communication, where we'll further explore specific steps you can take to make your relationships love-filled and your connections healthy and real. Thanks, y'all, for listening.
Thanks. Until then.
Bye.
Bye.